start recording now? I forgot that piece. We're shifting our focus from guidance to kind of what guides our guidance. And that, as we've already discussed, is that process of observing children, documenting, and also we're going to talk a little bit about analyzing children's language and conversations, because that's going to feed into another lab assignment that you have coming up in the next couple of weeks. So we'll get into that towards the end of our time together. I'm going to be starting with the content from it's actually the PowerPoint that's posted for Thursday. It's about understanding development and observing children. I'm kind of hopping around this week, but that's what I'm opening up now so that I can share with you. Just going to kind of talk about like the why behind that process, and give a little bit of guidance in terms of how we observe also. Okay. Sorry, guys, I had it open on one computer and not on the other. I thought I was more prepared than I am. Okay. So why do we observe children? Because we can assess not just children's development, but also their health. As a caregiver or a teacher, through observing children, we can also discover what children are interested in and then help make connections between children's interests and their learning. We can also learn a lot about children as individuals. So some of those things that we've talked about, personalities, temperaments, those are the types of things that we get to know by observing children. We can also learn about the skills that children haven't yet developed. So we're going to talk some about like milestone and developmental checklists and the value of those. But, from that information, then we can see how to plan appropriate experiences for children. We can also look at what strategies children use to attain their goals. So what are their current conflict resolution strategies? What are their problem solving strategies? And those type of things we understand better if we can closely observe children. And then, as I said, all of this knowledge that we come to about young children helps us be more intentional in planning how we're going to work with children in the future. So some sort of basics on how we want to observe children. We want to be very objective when we observe children. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in just a bit, but what I mean when I say objective is that we are recording only the facts, not our opinions, not our ideas about what we think children are feeling or how we think they're interacting. We just record the facts. There is some space for interpretation later in your planning process, but when you're doing your observation, you want it to just be based on what you see and what you hear. We also need to record in as much specific detail as possible. And we're going to have a little bit of practice with this on the call today. So you're going to get your a kind of a feel for the process. Could I get a show of hands, either in person or a virtual, hands up, if you have experience with observing children, either in real life or for another course that you've taken? Okay, so for many of you, this is not brand new, and this is just going to be a review of kind of these concepts. For some of you, it might be new information, so just bear with me if I'm not blowing your mind right now. So don't record things that you don't see or hear children doing. And then be sure to record things in the events that record events in the order that they occur. It's important sometimes, as I mentioned at the beginning of the course, that ABC analysis that we're going to do later on in the course. It's really important in those type of scenarios to understand what came before the behavior in question, what came after the behavior in question, so that we understand kind of the functionality of the behavior. So it's very important to kind of, record things as they happen. And then you'll see an example of this on one of the slides, but it's also important to note details like the date, the time, what children were involved. And that's just for record keeping purposes so that you can keep your, notes and stuff squared away. So I mentioned objectivity versus subjectivity. And here's just a kind of a visual on what makes those two ideas different. When you're looking at something objectively, it's kind of a neutral stance. So it's completely true, unbiased, balanced, not impacted by your own opinions or ideas. And something subjective means that it doesn't necessarily show a clear picture of what happened. It's based on another person's opinions or their own outlook. Objective observations are going to be facts, whereas subjective is more opinion, belief, assumption. And so when we think about, are we able to make decisions for young children or do our planning for young children based on our subjective ideas? Not so much. We want it to be very objective and based on, that child's experience. These are two examples of observations that you might see. Observation A is this. Amy and Josh are pretending to be puppies in the dramatic play center. Josh happily crawls to Amy and steals her blanket. Josh always takes toys from other children. Or we might see one that reads more like this. Same scenario. Amy says, Josh, let's be puppies. I'll be the mommy puppy and you be the baby puppy. Josh says, okay, ruff, ruff. Josh smiles as he crawls over to Amy and takes the blanket from her hand. He says, will you cover me up, mommy? So talk to me about the differences that you see between these two, observation A and observation B.
For observation A, she's talking about like happy, like she's saying he happily crawls over to her. And so to me, that's like subjective because you're putting in like an emotion that, it's not like a proven fact if he's happy.
Sure. In observation B, we can read that Josh smiled as he crawled over to Amy, and that is objective information that was observed by the recorder. But you're right that assuming a child is happy just because they smile, sometimes I smile when I'm nervous or when I'm uncertain. And so, yes, that was a reading into of emotion. What else stands out to you about the difference between these two?
In observation A, it says at the end, Josh always takes toys from other children, and there's no like proof or records of him always taking toys from other children. There has to be times when he didn't.
Sure. General rule of thumb in working with people and in just like life in general is that the terms always and never are so exclusive and black and white that they're almost never true. Because most people don't always do one thing or another or never do one thing or another. That's a blanket sort of judgment, right? And it's very subjective. It's also very negative in tone, and that's not something that I would necessarily include in an observation in general. I might, as a caregiver, be aware of the fact that Josh needs support in, learning how to navigate sharing. But to say Josh always takes toys from other children, number one, is probably just not true or factual. And it doesn't necessarily serve a purpose for being included in that observation either. And then just another thing that kind of jumps out, if you compare and contrast these two, is the use of language in observation B. So this person that's recording, they're able to capture the children's conversation and their language. And you can clearly see that actually when Josh took the blanket from Amy's hand, it was in a play scenario where they're engaged in dramatic play, and he's then asking her, will you cover me up, mommy? So it was a part of their pretend game. And without that language, to the observer who doesn't, key in on that or even pay attention to that, it might look like, something more like in line with observation A, where they're having a conflict over the blanket, but that wasn't in fact the case. And so that was an example of objective versus more subjective versus more objective note taking. And then here's an example between observation A and B of how we want your notes to be very specific rather than general. So observation A just says, Nan slid down the slide and he was happy. Observation B reads like this: Nan climbed up 6 steps using alternating feet while holding onto the handrail with his left hand. Once he reached the top of the landing, he sat down and scooted to the edge of the side. He made eye contact with Miss Jennifer and said, "Look at me." He slid down the slide while holding on to the edges with both hands. He landed on both feet at the bottom of the slide with a smile on his face. You can clearly see the difference between those two, right? And we've built in some observations about specific developmental skills, such as using alternating feet when holding the rail and climbing stairs. That's a point in development that is of interest to most people because we want to see children around 2-ish or 3 doing that. And so it's, that's kind of included in here because it's important. The same thing with making eye contact with the caregiver, the language that he used, all of that speaks to a whole lot more than what we can get when we just read observation A. Yes, so I'm going to go over this slide and then I'm going to switch gears. And so another kind of key component in thinking about observation is that we want to observe children in their naturalistic settings. So we want to see them interacting with familiar toys, materials, people in the context of what they are used to and in an unobtrusive way. So if we were in a classroom on campus at App and I came over to you, stood over your shoulder and said, "I'm just going to watch you today. I'm going to hang out, watch, while you take your notes. I just kind of want to make sure that I see, what you're getting out of this class experience." That would not be cool, right? It would make you feel very uncomfortable, I feel sure. And it would probably impact your ability to pay attention, your note-taking process. It would mine, that would not work for me. And so that's just kind of an example of what we don't want to be doing for young children. When we're observing them in their space, we want to do it in a really unobtrusive way and in a way that doesn't influence their play or their kind of natural interactions. Thoughts or questions on any of this before we shift gears to talking about specific observation tools and things like that? Okay. So while I'm getting this pulled up, you had a reading on this, and I've also posted, there are a couple of handouts on As You Learn, but just talk to me, someone share one of the ways that you remember that was given as a tool for observing or documenting children's behavior in the classroom. Those different types of note-taking records, things like that.
Checklist.
A checklist. Yeah. So can someone else tell me what is meant by the checklist?
Sorry, I was just trying to finish my lunch. You could either focus on like one child or as like a group setting, and you could lay out the activities in the classroom and check off every time you see that child do one, or you could wait till the end of the day and you and your teacher aide could sit down and discuss which child you've seen playing in that center for a specific amount of time and go through and check off their name or that activity to see if they're utilizing that material, is from my understanding.
Yep, that's one way to use it for sure. Another idea of it, so that can help kind of inform your classroom practice. And you might know, certain children are not accessing this space. We might need to include different materials or, like sort of support that child in going into that area to play, that type of thing, definitely. And then I'm having a hard time finding, I was going to show you, let me see if this will do it. I was going to show you an example of another kind of popular, this tool is used a lot in child development settings. And also my child's primary care pediatrician uses this one. It's called the Ages and Stages questionnaire, but it's a very basic like milestone development checklist. So another way that we might use this checklist approach is to take a child at a certain point in development. So these happen like well, initially for infants, it's like every 2 months because their growth and development is changing so rapidly. But then as the child gets a little older, it's more like 24 months, 30 months, 36 months, something around there. Maybe every 6 months or so, they have a different version of this available. And I don't think I'm seeing like the actual criteria. Maybe this might show you at least a general idea. Sometimes the Zoom is, am I sharing anything on my screen? What's happening? Can you see this?
No.
Okay. There we go. Sorry. Okay, so this is an example of the Ages and Stages questionnaire, and you can see it has different domains of development, communication, and then it just asks some really general questions about development related to this is, I think, for 48 months. Does your child name at least 3 items from a common category? For example, if you say, tell me something you can eat, can your child name 3 different types of foods? And then it goes through all these different skill sets. And there's a scoring page at the end where, obviously if the child is within a certain range, they would score typically developing. And then this can kind of flag for possible developmental delays. And it's a screening tool where you might then want to take a closer look at that child's development. So that's another example of checklist type of data that a caregiver or provider might collect on a young child. Can anyone think of another example of these types of tools?
The 2 different they're like records with the narrative and the anecdotal.
Yes. So let's talk about those for a minute because they're very similar, but slightly different from one another. Did anyone kind of notice the main difference between those 2 ideas? Narrative or anecdotal?
One's for like short term and one's like a long-term record keeping.
Possibly, yes. Narrative would lend itself more towards that long term. And then narrative is sort of narrative can be used, maybe not even necessarily in a play scenario, but more like one of the practice videos we're going to watch in just a second is about a caregiving routine. So in that instance, you're not necessarily telling a story. And that's what the anecdotal record does, is it sort of tells the story of the child's play or their experience. Narrative is really a running record of, this is what the caregiver did, here's how the child responded, that type of thing. It's just a simple nuance in terms of how they're different. But when you think about the narrative or the running record, you really want to think about yourself as sort of a video camera approach. You're just documenting what you see happening in that instance in the classroom. And so it, again, is a continuous recording of everything that a child says or does within a particular unit of time. And so in this example that we're going to look at, this would be, if you were observing this mealtime routine, then this would be part of what you would capture in your narrative. And so if everyone can get your note-taking pen and paper, or if I don't know that I could type it unless I had a different device going on, because you'll need to be able to watch this video and jot down a quick observation about the little girl who is receiving care at the lunch table is named Maya. And I want you to just practice writing down in a narrative running record format what you see happening with Maya during this transition away from mealtime. Thumbs up when you're ready for me to run it. Good. Okay. It's a short video, so get ready. You're gonna have to write quickly.
I don't know if it's just me, but I'm not seeing the video.
I can't see it either.
Okay, did you guys get that?
No, it didn't show on our screen because you're
We-
still sharing the PowerPoint screen.
Oh, sorry. Zoom is so cumbersome. All right, let's try that again. Can you see it now? Okay. Okay. Anyone willing to share what you jotted down?
Honestly, like I barely jotted anything down, but what I was kind of planning to write was that like the teacher or caregiver in this situation like had a what seemed to be like a little towel or a napkin that she was wiping off Maya's hands with, and then Maya took it out of her hand and began to wipe her mouth back and forth, like almost like the inside of her mouth. It was like very wide open while she was doing this. While the caregiver is like taking off her bib and she's continuing to like seemingly clean herself.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, you got a lot. So here is, I'm not going to read it to you guys, but here is what, you know, kind of a thorough narrative running record of that play experience would read like. Can everyone see that? Let me make it bigger. Maybe that will help. So the caregiver acknowledges, and I don't know if you caught this language, you want to do it as the child was grabbing the towel away from her. And then as you said, Maya started to wipe her mouth and tongue even. And then the teacher, you know, sort of praises that behavior. Okay, good job. But you can see, you know, it takes practice, right, to be able to observe a 20-ish second video and then to get all of this note taking down from just that little snippet of interaction. But again, we can see how this is so important as it relates to Maya's development, because we can see her, you know, becoming more autonomous in these self-care routines. She is understanding how to clean herself up and move on from mealtime to get ready for nap. So I think you can kind of clearly see the value, even just from this little 20 seconds in the classroom, of honing in on what's happening with each individual child. All right, so anecdotal notes, slightly different because this isn't necessarily related to a specific frame of time in the classroom. This is a short story that helps to record a significant incident that you might have occurred. So more than likely a play scenario, but you know, possibly some other experience with a child in the classroom. These are typically pretty short and they contain descriptive behaviors and also direct quotes when we hear children using language. Anecdotal records are probably the most popular note-taking approach in the early childhood setting. This is what people kind of tend to naturally do and base their planning and such on. And then these other ones are oftentimes more specific, like the checklist one again, would be related to a time where you were trying to really hone in on what's working well in our classroom, or what do we need to make adjustments to, or, you know, specific child development, so that you could have a parent teacher, you know, conference, or that type of thing would be, you know, really when I would think that you would use those. So these are more kind of everyday run of the mill, and then we'll talk about the other ones and when those would make the most sense also. So if you'll get your pens and papers ready again, we're gonna watch another short clip and get some practice with anecdotal notes. So remember, be as descriptive as you can. We might need to watch this one through twice. Be as descriptive as you can and include as much language as you can. And I can't see you guys anymore. Can you see what I was sharing? No, because I'm not.
No.
Okay, there we go. All right, I think we're ready. Okay. Were you able to get decent notes on that? When I'm taking notes using video recording, I almost always have to kind of pause and go back, and it's a pretty involved process. But just to give you a point of comparison, here is you know, just a really brief synopsis of what happened. Phoenix and Rory each piled up a mound of snow in front of them on the picnic table. The girls began to sing "Happy Birthday to Me, Happy Birthday to Me." When they finished singing, they puffed out their cheeks and pretended to blow out the candles on top of their snow cakes. Did anyone have anything vastly different than that?
I noticed they kind of started to eat the snow.
Oh, mhm.
They- that one started.
Yep, and there's a lot more details that I think, you know, could have been included in that. That is just sort of the it kind of gives you a short summary of the play experience, so that, you know, the reader understands that these two children were having an experience outdoors in the snow, and they were engaged in some dramatic play in creating, you know, birthday cakes out of the snow. And it really depends on what you're observing for and what you're writing these anecdotal records about, as to how much detail you would include about, different aspects of the play. Because, we know when we think about children's play, their play experience are these rich, they're very nuanced. There's a whole lot going on. And so we, as the observer, kind of have to decide based on our needs and our intention for the observation, what we're going to focus on. But yes, I think, again, there was a lot more detail that, you could have included in that play. Let's see here. So I'm going to go back into the PowerPoint. And I mentioned this before, but it's important when you're taking these anecdotal records, again, to note the time of day, the date, what classroom you're observing children in, the, children's names, teachers' names, all of that kind of information, just for your own record keeping purposes. And as a classroom teacher, obviously, it's important to know dates and times and what child said what and that sort of thing for planning purposes. Okay, so time sampling. Time sampling is a different method where we're going to be kind of taking a snapshot observation of children at an agreed upon interval of time. So we might be watching for what one child is going to be doing every 3 or 5 minutes in the classroom. An example of this could be related to a child being focused and engaged in play, or a child kind of wandering around the room, not engaged. And so, you might have columns, focused or engaged, unfocused, not engaged. And then you would have like a column for your different timestamps. And then again, you would just kind of check, is this happening? Is it not? That's a time sampling observation of children. And again, we would focus this, you can do this on one child or several children. Or this can be looking at teacher behavior. So an idea here might be, if you're trying to, as a teacher, use more positive language, you might ask your co-teacher to do this kind of time sampling on you, where she would take notes on, or he would take notes on the times that you used no or more restrictive language with the children. So this can be used in a couple different ways in the classroom. And this can be really helpful when we're looking at specific behaviors in young children. So, challenging behaviors, or when we want to be able to increase a behavior like engagement in the classroom, it can be very useful to know how often is this or is this not happening. And then we kind of build our intervention from there. Event sampling is a similar idea, and it's kind of related to time sampling, but this is not necessarily, this is not happening at a predetermined time. This is just recording the event whenever it happens during your observation period. So again, a challenging behavior, a child hitting. You might be in the classroom for 2 hours and you would record each time the child aggressed in that way towards another child and just write, what you saw happen. And again, that gives us information to help us plan interventions, or to plan, how to make the child's day feel more successful, because we would have a better understanding of hopefully what's causing this type of challenging behavior. And then the final one I'm not going to spend much time talking about is the ABC analysis, because again, we're going to focus on this extensively when we get a little bit further on in the course. But just as a reminder, that ABC analysis stands for antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. And so it's looking at one specific observable behavior in the context of what came before that behavior and then what happened next. Any thoughts or questions on any of these different record keeping approaches that we might use? So we're going to shift gears now and talk a little bit. I'm going to show you an example of a documentation, which is very much based on the Reggio approach. I'm sure if you've spent time at Lucy Brock, you have seen examples of classroom documentation, because this is the way that folks, lots of classroom teachers use this process now, not just people in, Reggio inspired programs, but people from Reggio inspired programs in particular kind of were the forerunners in having this understanding that documenting children's learning and their interests helps us make that visible in the classroom to other teachers, to the children themselves, to you guys as lab students. When you come into the classroom, there's a whole lot of value for documenting children's learning and then making that learning be seen in the classroom. It can also be used as a means for assessing children's growth and development. So, we can look at a child's portfolio and see growth over time. And that often comes from, reading these anecdotal records. So this is an example of kind of an expanded anecdotal record that the teacher in a classroom with young children would be taking notes in this way to write their documentation. They often, and they're much more visually appealing when they include photos of the children. And so I'm not going to read through this, but I'm just showing you an example here. We've got 2 infants from Lucy Brock who have been provided with this provocation of play on a blanket in their free play area. And this is just sort of a reflection of what they did with the ball of clay. So Millie, one of the infants, was observed pinching tiny pieces of the clay off, and she seemed to be interested in, exploring in kind of a sensory way those tiny pieces of clay. Where this fellow Rhett, down in the bottom photo, Rhett was observed 6 times, I believe, taking the big ball of clay and rolling it towards himself onto his lap and then pushing it away from himself. So, this is another example of how the teacher, being careful in her observation of children, she can show, different interests even among infants. And then she can base her planning maybe differently for Millie versus Rhett. Millie might want more of a sensory experience, where it looks like Rhett is doing something that's more related to gross motor in this experience. And so that's just a little bit of an example of how documentation can, serve a teacher in the classroom. And then I'm sure you guys are familiar with NC Feld's The Foundations for Early Learning, but I believe the teachers at Lucy Brock still have a practice of including these early learning standards on their documentation. This is always something that I had my staff at Generations do. And I think it's important because this is how we professionalize our work with young children. This is how we show that playing with children isn't just playing with children, but it's meeting the state standards for learning and development that caregivers are supposed to be, achieving when they're working with young children in the classroom. All right. I think, so we're going to get into this piece now about analyzing conversations. And I'll take a pause just a minute to show you that on the course page, there's a handout of this particular conversation from an early childhood classroom. And then there's also a handout related to those different tools for observing and documenting. So if it's useful to have that in like a sort of summarized handout version, that's available to you on the course page as well. But this conversations about leaves is where we're headed next. And I do need some volunteers. We're going to kind of read through this as if we were, children in the classroom talking. So if you're willing to become a volunteer, let me know. But before we get into it, I'm just going to kind of read the background information. So this is coming from someone who went to visit the schools in Reggio in Italy. And she said, My only experience in the art of having conversations with small groups of children has been in Italy and therefore with Italian children. I was eager to try my hand in my native language. I had followed many different conversations with 3, 4, and 5-year-old children and their teachers at the Diana and La Villetta schools, and had led several conversations towards the end of the year at the Diana school. I thought I understood the basics. I began taking a small group of 5 or 6 4-year-olds out of the classroom to converse about a variety of subjects. My first attempts were experiments. The children and I had some successes and some failures. We conversed about the classroom pet, Princess, a guinea pig, and about a huge bouquet of sunflowers brought by a parent. I found my way learning more and more about appropriate questions, how to best compose a group that might think and work well together, how to pace a conversation, how to record it, and how to stay out of it when necessary. So those are some kind of key points that I think are important when we think about our interactions with young children in the classroom and having these conversations. We need to be thinking about appropriate questioning, small group pairings. So like what children, work well together and what children don't, especially when we're planning these experiences, maybe as a teacher, how to pace a conversation, how to record it, and how to stay out of it when necessary. This person goes on to say, my first remarkable conversation with children was about the leaves and the changing seasons. It is one of my favorites and one that convinced me very early on that American children are every bit as bright and capable as Italian children. This conversation was based on rich experiences playing in the falling autumn leaves, noticing all the changes around them as fall progressed. And so, that gives you kind of the setting. And then I believe I need, let's see. Well, okay, you guys don't have the selecting. I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people who would volunteer to read.
I can read.
Okay, was that Megan? Okay, Megan, if you will be the teacher, I need someone to be Michael.
I'll be Michael.
Thank you, Jessica. I need someone to be Katie.
I can do that.
Okay, I can't see you, but thank you.
You're welcome.
David. Who will be my
I
David?
can be David.
Thank you. Meredith.
I can be Meredith. Oh, it doesn't matter.
How about one of you be Meredith and the other be Devin?
Okay.
Okay. Do we know who's who?
No.
Lexi, I see you. Lexi be Meredith, and then whoever was volunteering simultaneously, if you'll be Devin. And then I need 2 more, Alicia and Dan. Any takers?
I can do either one of them.
Okay, thank you. Is it Lana or Lana?
It's Lana.
Lana, if you'll be Alicia, Elysia.
Okay.
One more volunteer to be Dan, please.
I can be Dan.
Thank you so much. So you guys can see how this is going to go. If you'll just all stay unmuted if you're able to, and then when you see your part, just read it with as much enthusiasm as you can muster. Okay. And Louise is the teacher.
Oh, okay. What do you see?
Right. This part is white and this is red, turning leaf over. I wonder why. That must be the skin, pointing to the underside. This must be the body, pointing to the top. The sticks, the little things going out in the leaf must be bones.
You can see parts of the bones on mine too. See the things pointing out? The red is the body. These little stubs must be the bones.
I found the spine.
I found the spine too.
I know that everybody has a spine.
It's straight. I can feel the bumps of it.
It's like little hills. It goes up and down.
Don't break it. Then you can't move at all.
This part is like the leg.
Does the leaf walk?
No, it flies. I guess it's flying as it's walking.
And it jumps and skips.
Why do you think the leaves fall?
Because at the end of fall, they kind of curl up to sleep because they are tired.
Because they are dead.
When they fall off the branches, are they dead?
They are asleep when they fall. They curl up so they don't get cold. The leaves fall down because they are asleep. They die. It's too cold for them to live.
But the tree doesn't die. Maybe it does, but not for a very long time.
How could the leaves ever turn these colors?
They turn that way because I know why. Magic comes when it's fall. It turns the leaves to red in all colors. It gets very, very cold.
It's like Terminator. The bad guy changed to different things like the leaves, so nobody knows who he is. It's like putting on Halloween costumes. Maybe somebody has the power to change the leaves.
The wind has the magic power. It makes the leaves change.
I think the more the wind blows, the more the magic goes into the leaves and changes them.
Because somebody got magic.
I know who does it. The wind and the rain and the clouds and the sun. God does it.
I knew something was going on.
Okay. So some questions to kind of follow up on this. What knowledge can we say that these children having this conversation, what knowledge do they have?
They know about the body because they were talking about the skin and the bones and the spine, and then also about like flying and walking.
Yep. So they have some foundational understanding of human anatomy, and then how, how humans or other objects move through space. Yes. What else do they know?
It seems like they know the seasons, like it gets cold and like the wind in the fall and stuff like that.
They also have an understanding of the seasons and the changes that happen as related to those seasons. So in this scenario that we just read, when did the children use analogies or metaphors to communicate their ideas?
I guess an analogy would be like with the spine in the leaf, like the line going down it is like the spine of a body.
And they called it the bones of the leaf. And those are actually, I guess, called the veins of the leaf. But they're relating that to what they know about the human body and thinking about what, how the leaf is made up. There was another bit about, because at the end of fall, they kind of curl up and go to sleep because they are tired. That's a metaphor for what's actually happening to the leaves as they fall off the tree. They curl up and fall off the tree. The child relates it to their own experience of curling up and, sleeping when you're tired. And so, understanding kind of how children communicate, because they don't always have the language to describe the scientific phenomena of, I don't even have the language to describe exactly what's happening with the tree. I've kind of forgotten that stuff, but the child is still communicating, what they see and what they understand, and they use their own experiences in life as a way to communicate that. So we have to sometimes help make those connections for children. And the teacher did that. They said, well, are they dead when they fall off the branches? Because, the tree doesn't, and then a child came back and said, but the tree doesn't die, or maybe it does, but not for a very long time. So again, that question of, well, are they dead when they fall off the tree? That's helping the children kind of uncover their thinking and their understanding a little bit more. Another question related to this: how does listening to ideas from their classmates challenge, inform, or offer children new ways of viewing this problem of understanding what's happening with the trees. And I just gave you an example of that, right? The one child came back and said, but the tree doesn't die. And so, you know, they're bouncing ideas off of one another in these kind of small group conversations. Any other observations about the peer-to-peer piece, the children talking to each other?
I would say that with them being able to like communicate with each other that way, it offers them like a way to get to a bigger idea of what's happened rather than like just piecing the little things together. And like if somebody's wrong, they're able to communicate and say like, no, this is actually what happens. And in the end, they like get the whole big idea of what actually is happening.
Sure. Yep. And you know, a part of their conversation that kind of speaks to what you're sharing, Kinsley, is at the very end when they start talking about magic. Someone is relating it to putting on Halloween costumes and having the power to change the leaves. And then another child says the wind has the magic power. It makes the leaves change. And then another child says, wait, I know who does it. The wind and the rain and the clouds and the sun, God does it. And so, you know, that's her concept of what's changing the weather. But yes, they're all kind of sharing their big ideas about what's happening. And that helps them get to, as you say, that kind of bigger knowledge that, you know, maybe it's not magic, maybe it's weather and forces of the wind or that type of thing. But this is how children, you know, experience learning, right? Through these small group peer-to-peer conversations and interactions. And then they're supported by the teacher who knows when to step in, when to ask a prompting question, when to maybe show them something that, you know, helps either solidify the child's theory or maybe challenges their theory. But, you know, it's more valuable to just be part of the conversation than to, oh, no, it's a process called photosynthesis. And this is what, you know, I mean, that's not how children learn. They learn in this way of having these kind of, you know, learning conversations. And so what might we do next with these children? If we think about taking this observation piece and applying it, expanding it into our interactions with children, what would be something that we might do to build upon this conversation if we were teachers in a classroom in the fall with these children?
I would say maybe find a book about leaves to read, like at story time or something.
Certainly always good to bring in shared reading experiences and to find literature that relates to what the children are thinking about. What else might we do?
You could have like a lesson on like the different seasons and have like trees and stuff and like show the different seasons and how the tree like goes throughout the season.
Yeah. And then, you know, since I said we're situated in the season of fall and this is happening, we could also take the children outside with clipboards and, you know, colored pencils so that they could make their own notes about what's happening in this season. And then we might do that every season and kind of create our own little classroom book where we're comparing and contrasting what we see on our tree outside our window in the fall, and then in the winter, and then in the spring, and then in the summer. All good ideas for how we might carry this further. But, you know, the point of this is to show that the work that we're doing with children, we want it to be based on the work that children are naturally doing on their own. So they're having these conversations and these ideas, trying to figure out what's happening to the trees when they curl up and, I'm sorry, the leaves when they curl up and fall off the trees. And so, you know, as a responsive caregiver, that's where we know, because we're closely observing children, hey, this is something that's of interest to them and they, you know, are trying to learn more about. So this is how I can build my curriculum in a way that relates closely to what the children are already invested in. Okay. So we've covered a lot, and then I'm just going to, I'm going to hop back over to the other PowerPoint where we were talking not about the specific tools, but kind of how to observe and give just a few more suggestions about that. And then I think we'll have a few minutes to touch base on the lab assignment related to this conversation analysis piece, just to see if anyone has questions about that, because this is coming up due. So I've already said observing children in a naturalistic, unobtrusive way. And then just some suggestions for, when you get to the point where you're observing in a classroom, it's important for you to be comfortable. Because again, you don't want to be hovering or, you want to be inconspicuous. So a comfortable place to sit with a good view of most of the room, keeping the children, you keep yourself in the background so that you're not a distraction in the classroom. And then if the children ask you something like, what are you doing? You can just say something like, I'm writing a story about the play that I see you doing, or something like that. But you don't want to, overshare, again, because you're trying not to be a distraction and not to draw attention to yourself. I just came to watch you play. That's what I often use. And one thing I was going to just say, this is something that I struggled with as a young teacher, was when I was doing this observation work in my own classroom, to help me with my planning practice. Something that you have to learn to balance is focusing on the child or children that you're trying to observe, but also I have a practice of doing a room scan like every 20-ish seconds, because you also have to be providing supervision to the rest of the classroom to make sure, if you're the primary caregiver in there, that nothing is happening that's not safe, or, that children are not in need of some help or assistance. And so you can't just sit and observe and kind of tune out what else is going on, unless that's your role. If you're in the classroom, in this context, going in to just do focused observation, then yes, that's what you would be doing. But as a primary caregiver, it's important to remember those room scans also. If you are in a class experience observing children and they ask you for your help, try to direct them to a teacher, because again, you want to be very much a fly on the wall, if you will. And then trying to keep any particular child that you are observing, from being really conscious of your attention. So looking around the room, not making it obvious that you're there to watch one specific child, if that's the case. When we think about early childhood, one of the kind of cornerstones of our work is the importance of involving families in our work. And so it's really important that we are open to, we always say families are the first expert on their child. And so if we have a concern or a question about a child's behavior, before I even started the process of doing that, like event sampling or time sampling, I would start with a conversation with the parents and say, here's a behavior that we're observing in the classroom. Are you seeing this at home? We might want to take a closer look at it in the classroom to see kind of like the functionality of the behavior. Do you have any insights that you might be willing to share with us? Because again, we always want families to be a part of the conversation. And then if you're having that type of conversation, sometimes it's useful to give families really specific concrete examples of the kinds of information that you're looking for. And then, classrooms should always be kind of having an open door policy, even though we're living in the COVID world where actually open door isn't necessarily possible anymore. That communication piece has become even more important, and finding, virtual ways or new and kind of inventive ways to keep families connected with their children when they're in a care setting is definitely, I would say, even more important today than it used to be. Okay. So that kind of in a nutshell is what you need to be aware of as it relates to observing, and then the documentation piece of observation. And then I'm going now to the class page under week 4. is where your conversation analysis lab is going to be posted. And there's a handout linked under that assignment turn in submission link. I don't know, my brain stopped working. And the handout looks like this. So the conversation is down below. It relates to a project that you may have seen an example of or be somewhat familiar with from other classes that you've taken. This was a project done at Lucy Brock years ago, but the conversation among the children that were involved in this project is here for you to read. And then you're going to answer the questions above. So you're going to give specific statements that you interpret the meaning of children's language and what were they trying to communicate in number 1. Inferences that you might draw about their development in number 2. And again, remember, this is objective. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're avoiding judgment or evaluation, and we're just inferring based on what we read the children as saying. Then we're supposed to interpret, what we think they know based on that. So it's practice in that sort of objectivity. And then it's up to you to think and expand this to developmental theories that support your inferences that you make in number 2. So if I say, the child is, something about their social development, it kind of in that peer-to-peer conversation that we were talking about before. If I make an inference that they're at a certain level with their social development, I would probably draw on, an Erikson theory or a Piagetian theory, those theorists that talked about social development, social interaction, how it supports cognitive development. That's what we're looking for in number 3. Does that make sense? Okay. You can see this is worth 25 points and the rubric is down here. In order to get 25 points, you will turn this in on time. It will be complete in terms of these 3 questions being answered, and it will demonstrate a depth of thought. So that's pretty loose, but include as much detail as you feel you need to support your examples, ideas, and then the theories that you're drawing on. So that's coming up. And then I mentioned quiz 3 coming up next week, I believe on Tuesday. And for the asynchronous class on Thursday, again, you have everything you need posted to the course page. Just review that lecture and take some notes for yourself. Okay. Sorry, I'm just now seeing in the chat. But yeah, anything that was missed at the beginning of the call is recorded. And I'll post this as soon as I can get it ready to go on the page. All right.
Do you want us to say our names in the chat?
Oh yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you so much for that. I'll put a sticky note on my computer so I can remember that. I'll give that just a few more minutes. And then, yeah, if you don't have anything else, questions or anything like that, you're free to go. Just make sure you've given me your name before you hop off. And I will see you guys next week on Tuesday. Thank you.
I'm in your 2103 class,
Mhm.
and I know yesterday was a holiday, and I know that Wednesdays are also asynchronous, but since yesterday was a holiday, is it still going to be asynchronous or are we going to meet?
I sent you an email to this effect, but no, we will not meet this week unless I teach that class another section coming up at 2 o'clock. And if you wanted to hop on that call, otherwise you can just get what you need from the course page.
Okay.
Okay.
Have a good day.
You too.